of Education to order. First up is verification the meeting was properly posted.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you very much. Second order of business is opportunity for public comment. We're now at the section of our meeting where there's an opportunity for citizens to speak. We have one speaker this evening, so we will be able to do the 5 minutes if you have enough comments. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board and/or committee meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and this board committee does not endorse any comments made by board members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in a respectful and productive way and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that would detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, please silence your cell phone. The speaker this evening is Paul Reese.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'd just like to talk about the public speaking portion here. That the same thing sheet that we sign up for keeps changing. And that, that there's a problem with, what is said from this platform. I'm not a wallflower. I don't shy away from controversial issues. I don't always bring them here either. I respond to things, and I'm not a wallflower, and I'm not going to run away from them. But it's so weird because we're talking about courses in high school that we're going to have these big discussions about big ideas. But as soon as you have an idea that differs from some people, they have a hissy fit about it. And I don't know how many of you get emails from what I say, but I know some do. And then I'm told to tone it down, Paul, watch what you say. And I get it, what I say, and why I say it. But the idea that we're going to have a high school where we're going to discuss big ideas, and some people have an absolutely hissy fit with it. At orientation, the principal said something today at West that's really informative. And he said, to some people, if you have a problem with a teacher, talk to the teacher before you come to me. So if some people have a problem with what I say, try talking to me. It's not Patrick's fault what I say, and it's not Corey's fault. It's not Kelly's fault what I say. She has nothing to do with what I say and nothing to respond to. And I've called Joe Como up before, and he said to me, Paul, I saw who called, and I still answered the phone. Which means, okay, you don't really care what I have to say, but I'm going to say it anyways to you. But he's not endorsing anything I say, and I'm not ever going to go to someone about something someone else said. I go to the person. But you're going to hear what my opinion is then if you come to me. But I'm not afraid of it. But to go to other people and to cry about what I say is just juvenile, and it shows the level of intellect in our school district with either our parents or our teachers who cannot come to me and talk to me about what is said if they have a problem with something, but have to run to Kelly and put pressure on her and give her 100 emails about something I said. It's me. Not that big of a deal. I just have a different opinion on things. And if you want to bring things here and bring them up here and bring them into our schools, I'm going to voice my opinion on it, whether you like it or not. And I personally don't care. And if you don't have a problem with it, yeah, here I am. I'm here almost every meeting. I'm here quite a bit. So 6 or 7 o'clock, usually a little early. So anyways, thanks.
Thank you, Paul. All righty, moving on to action items. First item up is approval of the minutes. Be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Anthony. Is there a second? Mark, second. Any comment on the minutes?
No.
No? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Next up is the approval of the at-risk identification plan.
Yeah, so annually, we have to present to the board the at-risk identification plan. We've been doing this now for 8 or 9 school years. I'm trying to remember exactly how far back it goes. We've gone through the Teaching and Learning Committee and to the board, and now we'll go through Student Services and then the board. We provide a variety of services to students in at-risk, and we go through a detailed process to identify students. State statute requires that we begin to look at this when students are in 5th grade. That may seem early, but we want to start with an early intervention if we can. We start to look at attendance rates, performances on state assessments, local assessments. We will continue to use our special education identification along the way. So if a child is a child with a disability, we'll go through the evaluation process and make that identification, provide those services if needed. We often think of our at-risk supports generally provided through EAST, but know that when we go start in 5th grade, we're beginning to have that conversation with parents, family members, wrapping support around students, using our processes. We have a student problem-solving team. So if I'm the student who's demonstrating poor attendance or low academic achievement, the school will begin to meet with me and reach out to my family, and we want to catch kids as early as we can. So those services and supports are there for students who are 18 plus. Any child in Wisconsin, based off of our Article 10 of our Constitution, is entitled to a free education from ages 6 to 20. And usually when students start to go beyond that 18th or that 4th year of high school, we're providing services at East. We do provide remedial and at-risk services at each of our brick and mortar high schools, North, West, and South. They have a dedicated staff member there. We're trying to use those staff to target freshmen and sophomores who are starting to become credit deficient. Our school social workers, psychologists, counselors, administrators are working on attendance issues. So we have a plan and we have services, and that's how it all comes together through the approval of this. We're not recommending any changes this year. This plan has been, reviewed, revised, brought forward for a number of years now, and we feel pretty confident with what it does for us. Last year's East High School had a 76% graduation rate, which is remarkable for an at-risk school. So we're very proud of what we do. We work to continue to get better, and the T&L committee entertained some of those changes at East earlier this year, at the end of last school year. So I'm here for any questions that you may have on this plan.
Any questions regarding the at-risk identification plan?
I do have one or two. If you, I guess, go to page 4 and under the how parents are informed section.
Yep.
Right in about the middle there, it says in the letter, parents and students will be invited to meet with their child's, et cetera. Is that a mandatory meeting, or I'm just kind of keying in on the word invited? Or is that something that people, students and parents really aren't going to turn down?
We do make the invitation to families. In some instances, they don't attend, but that doesn't prevent us from going forward, coming up with a plan for that student, implementing that plan. We'll maintain our obligation, but we do try to reach out and get parents in as soon as we can to try to get the ball rolling in this. Oftentimes we're seeing, at the younger grades, we're seeing, levels of absenteeism. In many instances, when you're elementary age, absenteeism isn't always your fault as a child. So we want to try to provide some wraparound support and help parents understand the importance of school attendance, try to remove some barriers for them, and get that student attending more at school.
Okay, so,
So it's not mandatory that they attend, but we do invite them to attend, and we know that their support and their participation is very important.
gotcha. So then if they don't accept the meeting, does the district just, I guess, suffice that a letter was sent, so that's how the parent was informed then?
Correct. Letter, email, phone calls, but we do use a formal letter as a notification for it.
Okay. All right, and then further down, the last sentence there, it says, the at-risk label may be removed per parent request for a minor student, or if the student is not receiving any documented services.
Correct.
So, if you go just above, the section just above, it does say that at-risk label, if you will, or identifying someone at risk, they'll always be considered at risk. So then later we're saying they can have it removed, so I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, so without the request to remove the at-risk label, we would always consider that student to potentially be at risk of not graduating from high school. And research has shown that if you're starting to demonstrate poor attendance at the elementary level, you have a likelihood of that repeating upper middle school, high school. So we want to make sure that once we identify a student, we're always paying attention to where that student is at academically in our system. We don't want kids to fall through the cracks, and this is one of those methods. But if a parent says, I want it off, we will take that off.
Okay. I'm just wondering if we need clarification in there that, because I guess they're not always considered at risk if the parent can remove it.
They're still considered at risk of graduating, just not able to. You still know they're not going to graduate.
Correct. I mean, we do not stop monitoring students' progress. I mean, so if you look at a number of other mechanisms, so if one of the factors is chronic truancy, we continue to monitor attendance. So just because the student is labeled at risk or not, we'll know that their attendance. And then those students are being followed in our system through our SST and PST processes. So student services team that kind of looks at whole school data, problem-solving team, which might look at an individual student, and those kids are continuing to come up on the radar, but they may not necessarily qualify in this at-risk category. The importance of the at-risk designation per the statute is it allows us to do creative things with programming. So if we go back to what was presented as programmatic changes at East, we've adjusted services at East for students because we have looked longitudinally over time, and we've noticed that kids are continually struggling or they're coming significantly credit deficient to us. So we're trying to tailor the program to meet them. Absent that at-risk designation, you're not given that protection. I mean, we can provide the opportunity, you're just not given that protection going forward, and that's the benefit of having that at-risk designation. But you're not going to fall through the cracks here to the best of our abilities.
Okay. We
We do have kids, and, we love to have a 100% graduation rate, but we do have kids who fall through the cracks. They leave us, we don't know where they go. Try to follow up with them. Those kids would start down this pathway, and we tend to see that pretty early in their educational career, so upper elementary, early middle school.
Okay. And then the only other thing I had on page 5, the second bullet under at-risk student review process. It said classroom teachers and student services staff will record the interventions in place. If you could just explain what that means. What, is it just a written record of it, or what does that mean?
Yeah, so we have intervention records on the students who receive intervention. So for instance, if a student is receiving an attendance intervention and they're meeting with our school social worker or school counselor, there'll be a record of that we have, utilized it. We've evaluated if it's effective or not. If it's not effective, we've made adjustments to what that is. Perhaps we started to reach out to county for other interventions and supports. Perhaps we have, made connections and found that there's a barrier to getting to school for a student. So we really try to work and help kids out. Where this is really helpful for students is at the high school level, when you are, it's turning into a student who's chronic truant, and you're one of 1,200 kids at one of our high schools, we then start to explore the pathway as East, the more appropriate placement. The smaller environment, you can keep your hands on the kids a little bit more. We can, make adjustments to what the graduation requirements are, provided they're meeting the minimum state requirements. We're able to bring services in on a more frequent basis so that kids can connect to employment, connect to county services, and East then is able to wrap around our students who are demonstrating the most at-risk behaviors in our system just because of the environment that we have there and the supports that are there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is there a specific absenteeism number for the younger grades that triggers that? Is there a red flag that pops?
So it's a truancy, like chronic truant would start to fall in. So it's missing any, oh boy, you're going to call me on this, Mr. Montiel. I think it's any part of 5 days or 10 days, and I apologize.
I thought it was 10.
10 days, it might be, yeah, any or part of 10 days over the course of a school year. That if a student is missing that many days, then we would begin to send letter notifications to families. You hit a 5-day mark, you hit a 10-day mark. Now, some students may be ill, parents provide a doctor's excuse, or the family may be taking a longer vacation or whatever it is. We start the communication pathway there. But some students are out 15, 20, 30, 40 days, starting at that upper elementary level. And we want to make sure that we're starting to connect with the family as soon as we can, because we know that school attendance is extremely important.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? So just so I'm clear, if you lose the designation of at-risk, does that mean that you can't participate in the credit recovery?
No,
You cannot.
you cannot.
Okay.
We
Just want to
maintain.
make sure that that's clear, that if that designation is gone, the credit recovery program,
Right.
you can't attend it.
We have an obligation to begin this conversation and discussion with families, because sometimes you don't realize in the fifth grade, in the sixth grade, that you're starting down a pathway of possibly not graduating. I mean, if you're missing, and I talk to parents regularly, if you're missing 20 days of school a year, you're missing essentially a ninth of the school year. 30 days, it's a sixth of the school year, and when you start to conceptualize that, 40 days, you're now at 20, it really starts to have a huge impact on what that student is taking in. And, 80% school attendance, 4 out of the 5 days of the week, you might think 80% is pretty good, but when you multiply that over the course of the year, you're missing 40 days of school, 42 days of school based off of the number of weeks we have. And that really does start to add up in missed instruction. That may not be as noticeable when a student is in the upper elementary and middle school years, because you're not in a credit attainment pace at that particular point. But when you get to high school and you've established that pattern of behavior, freshman year, if you miss 20, 25% of the school year, you're now missing the days where the tests and the quizzes are given, the presentations are given, and it's very difficult to get out of that routine behavior. So earlier intervention that we can provide, the better it is. And just to be clear, we don't start intervening on attendance issues in the fifth grade. We start that if a student is demonstrating that in kindergarten. We're already working with the family in kindergarten, but sometimes those patterns of behavior continue.
Since you brought it up, or maybe one of you, just explain briefly the credit recovery.
So a student who is, for instance, a high school freshman, has the ability to earn 8 credits over the course of the freshman year. They go through the school year and say they earn 2. We then, the following year, can take a look at what courses they're being offered. They may lose some opportunity for elective, but we can provide them recovery opportunities, say in the areas of math, English, social studies, science, where you're getting those cores during what would be those study hall periods. And we use the software, Edmentum software, where it's an individually paced but guided by a teacher credit program, where you go through, you get the curriculum, you take the tests, you demonstrate your proficiency, you can earn that credit. Hopefully between that extra period or 2 a day, plus the summer school opportunities that we have, we can start to get kids caught up, so that by the end of sophomore year, maybe they had a bad freshman year, started to get things together a little bit sophomore year, they're starting to get on pace to graduate then by their junior year, earn the 25 credits that we have as a graduation requirement in Waukesha, and move across the stage. We try to build in as many supports as we can, because my experience as a teacher, I taught at the high school level, freshmen and sophomores were a little bit lost and a little bit irresponsible, speaking in general. But usually by junior and senior year, the kids started to get things together. They started to grow up, the maturation. They understood some of the consequences of what would happen, and then they would get caught up and move forward. East High School is the area where you could get essentially the most credit recovery. So we offer a competency-based diploma for students who might be a senior with 1 or 2 credits, and we do have a handful of those every year. We have the ability to, with small individual attention, accelerate the schedule so that kids can, get caught up at a much faster rate. When you're 1 of 10 students in a class instead of 1 of 30, that individual attention does help move kids along. And then as they start to, come along, buy into the program, they will accelerate themselves. So a student, if you could earn 8 credits over the course of a semester, sometimes we see kids earn 10 or 11 credits, because it starts to make sense. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. They want to get out of here. They have possibly an opportunity in the military, possibly an opportunity to go into an apprenticeship, or they have a job hanging out there that they just need to be done with school, and they see that purpose then in that diploma.
Sure. Thank you.
Joe, is there a lot of students that have that designation or label removed? Is that a common thing to have the
It's-
parents ask?
Occasionally, at the younger ages, we see that the request is made because it's kind of daunting when they hear about the support and services that we provide. That does cushion it, but we usually see that request at the younger ages. As kids get older, people start to see like, yeah, I need my kid to graduate, or the kid even starts to say, I've got to get done, and what I'm doing right now isn't working. So a little bit more buy-in as the kids get older, a little bit of resistance to it when they're younger.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions? We looking for a motion?
Move to approve the district's processes and procedures for identifying at-risk students in grades 5 through 12.
Thank you, Ms. Montijo. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Zenobia. Any further questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? 4-0. Excellent, thank you. Moving on to discussion information items. First one up is policy 5500, Student Code of Classroom Conduct. Now, this policy was requested to be put on the agenda, so what questions do we have? Mr. Zenobia.
Thank you.
Yep.
So my request for this and the next one, 5511, was we had a pretty lengthy discussion on behavior, and trying to get ahead of that this year. My overall question in bringing these policies forward is there anything that the board can do to strengthen the guidance that the administration has for tackling some of the behavior issues? Are there areas that maybe have gotten outdated that need our attention? And, overall in bringing these forward, that was my goal. I know, and we can discuss it next, but the dressing and grooming is always one that comes up. And those things kind of go to the behavior of, what's going on in the school district. So that really is my question, is what can, if anything, the board do? What additional guidance could the board give on, strengthening the tools that you already have at your disposal?
So from a policy standpoint, we have a handful of policies, probably two handfuls of policies that address a variety of student behaviors. And I've mentioned and referenced before policy 5600.01, consequences for student misconduct. And that's the policy that talks about level 1, 2, and 3 offenses and gives, some examples of each. We have the harassment, bullying, policies that we follow, hazing policies and such. So, from a policy standpoint, the board has given us a lot of guidance. In recent years, the board has given us the flexibility to, allocate and reallocate staffing positions to help us proactively address behavior. So when we, and I believe Mr. Como and Mr. McCaffrey have spoken of it in the past, there was a point in time where the board cut all of the elementary guidance counselors except one. Elementary guidance counselors and staff at that level were really good at helping students develop and maintain positive peer relationships. They were really good at intervening when you had minor disagreements before behavior started to really escalate. In the last 8 years or so, we have gotten to the place where we've been able to staff each of our schools at the elementary level with a social worker or psychologist. We had to be creative in the positions because we needed to, have some flexibility, particularly around special education evaluations, 504 plans and such, which is why we, chose to use psychologists. But the flexibility that the board has given us around staffing in that area, has been very helpful. When we've looked at and reviewed the type of discipline, our policy 5600.01 talks about drug use and focuses on drug use. The issues that we run into now around drug use, which account for over 50% of the pre-expulsions that we do and can tend to lead to a lot of the behavior that you guys hear about, particularly at the middle and the high school level, with the introduction of vapes and that inhaled nicotine, which has led to then the vapes with marijuana oil, the legalization of marijuana in Illinois and Michigan. It just has really created an access point for students to get it at a much younger age, the availability of it. But then on top of that, you throw in a level of acceptance by families that, hey, this isn't that bad. When Luke Pinion, me, Jason Gahan, our secondary director of special ed, Mark Lenner, who's going to be filling in that, Luke's position going forward, when we've been in pre-expulsions, we've heard parents like, hey, it's just marijuana. It's not a big deal. And we continue to hear that message coming to us in the family, like it's just marijuana, it's legal in half the country. And it's not legal here in Wisconsin. It's a huge barrier to learning, and it provides, significant obstacles and stuff in school. So it's not anything that the board has done as far as creating a barrier to, behavior for us. It's just a general acceptance. We have policies that are in line with what the laws are, and what we believe as a community and as a board are, the generally accepted things that should be allowed in or should not be allowed in school. But we're butting up against a belief, and most of those pre-expulsions that involve drugs, involve a level of, it's just dope. I mean, we, laughed, and I say laughed kind of in a light way, but we had, I think it was 2 school years ago, we had a student who actually was caught drinking at school, alcohol. Like, it was the only one we've had in the longest time. Now, when I was in high school, drinking was a big thing. Early in my career, alcohol was students, they'd have a water bottle and it would have vodka in it, or they'd have a soda bottle and it would be rum and Coke or whatever it is. That was a problem that we faced, and that's not an issue that we face anymore in and around alcohol. It really is centering around vapes, and then, vapes with just the nicotine-based stuff, but then vapes with marijuana oil in it. We rarely find kids who actually have marijuana in the sense of a joint or, a bag of marijuana where they'd put it in a pipe. So that is one of the issues that we're facing as a system. Post-pandemic, I was just in a parent meeting yesterday with one of our new administrators. She came from a different district. We're meeting with the parent. Everything that we faced in Waukesha, she faced in her prior school district last year. There's a set of behaviors, there's things that we're facing with our kids, which is why we're forming the discipline committee. We're really working on setting behavior expectations for kids going into the school year, teaching behavior at school, really emphasizing that component of it, because there are things that were missed in that year and a half or so of substantial disruption around the pandemic that, we are seeing here in Waukesha, but all school districts are seeing. There's just a difference in how students are behaving. So I think in time, Mr. Zenobia, to your question, we're going to get our hands around that. We're doing a lot of proactive work going into this particular school year. From a policy standpoint, I don't think that there's any policy that the board would pass that would really influence that. The board has been very supportive of us when it comes down to resources to try to address this stuff in school. Major behavior a few years back, Mr. Montillo, Mr. McCaffrey, when the board approved the addition of school resource officers in our school, that led us into the discussion of having community adopt school officers so that our elementary schools have a point of contact. We have that strong relationship to deal with major behavior. It's those low, subtle things that we're making the tweaks to our system to try to address going into the school year. If you wanted to give me a checkbook and blank check, we could look at adding more psych, social workers, counselors, specialized behavior people, but I think we have a really good staff there. We're experiencing some shortages in people this year. There's just not as many school psychologists available. We're going to go into this year down 2 positions, not because of funding, but because of availability of staff. We've added a social worker position posting, to see if we could fill the psych positions with the social workers. We have no applicants for that, so we're just starting to see a shortage in employee pool, and those people are integral in helping us with this behavior work. Good common expectations, good teaching of behavior, good communication with families around what it is that we're trying to do, what our expectations are, good follow-up with low-level behaviors before it gets high. But the people then that are there to help us specialize, we're seeing next year that's probably, those people are going to be thinned out a little bit. And I think that'll be a barrier to us, but it's not a policy-based barrier. It's just the availability of people.
Mr. Montiel.
Thank you. You mentioned the discipline committee, and we talked about that, and the work is ongoing.
Yep.
And then you made a comment that I like to hear. I like to operate under wish lists. Is the discipline committee, the work that's being done there, out of that, will it possibly come a wish list of, hey, board, if we could have unlimited resources, which we don't, and
Right.
the budget situation, but boy, of the things on that wish list, we could really use these 5 things or these 4 things?
I mean, that's possible.
Okay.
We're going to start out with a root cause analysis, and the first areas that we're going to focus on, we're going to have 3 staff members from each of our schools. We have a teacher representative, a student services representative, and the building principal is going to be there.
Okay.
And we're going to start out under the guise of what frustrates you the most about student behavior. And after we get that, kind of that anecdotal discussion going, like what are your impressions, what are your thoughts, what are your experiences, we're going to take a look then at what our referral data actually is showing us.
Okay.
And are the 2 in line? And then as a result of that, then we're going to go back and work with our schools. The team that comes to meet with us at the district is going to go back to their schools and are going to begin to facilitate that discussion there. So could we come to a place where it's like, yeah, if we had this would be the big thing, I think, that would help move us forward. I think for us, it's a matter of going back and, without going through this process, but just my observations of it, it's recalibrating our system post-pandemic to figure out what it is that we need to teach kids so that they can come back to school in a face-to-face environment and really learn and thrive. It's a matter of coming up with a systematic approach to address those problematic behaviors that we're seeing at schools. And that's where school teams are going to have the flexibility to do what it is that they need, because, high school's approach at their difficult time or their difficult behavior is going to be much different than an elementary. And across our elementaries, we might see different. So we're going to have to give them the flexibility to prioritize what's there. Once we get into that prioritizing, the strategizing, that then could be resources.
Okay.
That could be we need to have a curriculum resource that is in place. That could be we need to adjust our schedule a little bit to provide a support to. That could be a place then where we're like, you know what, we're a little bit pinched because, or we might find that, we have, like our special education aides, as board members have heard, we don't have enough aides or whatever it might be. Well, our aides are 5.75 hour in general people. And we are in competition with school districts that pay, 6 or 7 hours a day and they're benefit eligible. That then could be a conversation that comes to the board and something that the board needs to consider as to what is the compensation from a hourly rate and a benefits rate with our special ed aides, because it could be identified that is a problem that we're facing.
Yeah,
Some of our schools have consistently run short. Postings have been open all year. We haven't been able to find people in that aide pool, fill our teaching positions, but those aides aren't always there. And that inconsistency could drive some of the behavior that we're seeing. So
Yeah.
all of that could come. I don't want to forecast that, but those are just some general hypotheses that I would have as to.
Right. Thank you. I guess I would ask that, possible solutions not be shut down, and I'm getting no indication from you that they would be, just because there may be a prediction that the board may or may not do something. That should be something that, if there's a solution out there or multiple solutions, that comes to the board, and the board decides, are we going to do that? And I'm glad you mentioned special education aides. I just spoke with one, or was part of a conversation with one who works at one of our elementary schools, and well-loved, fantastic at her job, and is considering other options because the pay is just not comparable, and we hate to lose her. So
Yeah, and what we're dealing with, the wage we've heard is pretty good. I mean,
Yeah.
we're very compatible on the hourly rate, but there are school districts that are paying benefits. And what we have experienced with our aides is the minute those benefit eligible positions come available in another district, we're losing them, because that's the insurance component of it. And that, takes the cost of an aide and drives it up by about 40% if you're adding the benefit piece on.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep.
I got a
That
couple
one?
of things, yeah.
Go.
All right, so I guess this would be the 4th paragraph down. So it's the paragraph right above A, and I think it's the second last sentence. So it reads, in addition, student conduct on internet-based social media outlets, when such conduct forms a sufficient connection to school or staff, is governed by the code of conduct. So the phrase forms a sufficient connection, not to get too nitpicky or whatever, but I mean, I can surmise what that means. I don't know if there's a better word than sufficient, but does it mean like a clear connection that they're identifying a specific school or a specific person?
Yeah. So if we're going to start investigating things that are be involved in or discipline things that are related to social media, which is generally what it is, it has to either have a significant impact on what's going on in the school day or have a nexus with the school. And so we go in and, we investigate it. Now, there could be bullying that happens online on the weekend and it's not at all connected to school, that's not a situation that we get involved in, because we
Sure.
can't, because the person who's doing it, then they also have rights, so we can't just punish people for everything. But if it's a situation that starts online, spills into the school, continues online, because it's spilling into the school day, infecting, it's affecting fifth hour math every day, then we can get involved, and, whatever happened online then has now affected what's going on at school, and we can then intervene.
Okay. All right. And then the very last paragraph. So there's basically 3 sentences there. I don't think the second one's actually a sentence. I think it's supposed to be just connected with the third one, but maybe by a comma. So if the staff member believes in good faith that the threat represents a serious and imminent threat to the health or safety of students, staff, or others, the threat is a threat of violence made in or targeted at a school. I think that's supposed to be like comma, staff must still report threats as described in the policy.
Well, I think it's what the staff person believes is the threat. I think that second talks about, like, if I'm the teacher at the school and I saw something that was, threatening in nature, or I perceived it to be threatening in nature, then it could be considered to be a threat to the school environment. The last part talks about the staff's mandatory requirement of reporting threats of violence against the school. And just to note, if you scroll down, I know that it's not in the text, but you see the legal citations that are associated with this policy. And without going in and researching each one of them, what I've learned with the policies that are recommended by Neola and the ones that we've approved, that they are all grounded in statutory statements. I've reviewed policies in the past where it's like, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? But it's actually lifted directly from the state statute or the administrative code, and you're like, it should be that in the policy as such.
Okay, I guess I just don't know what it's saying then, because like I said, I think it's a fragment. It's just saying if the staff member believes this, then what? That's why I think it's supposed to be saying, then the staff must still report such threats as described.
I see what you're saying,
I-
but, or is it just saying that staff must still report threats that are described in, I don't know if are those threats in the sentence before described in 8462? Or are we just referencing that we still have to report threats described in?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I'm saying that maybe 8462, there are other threats listed in that policy that are not in that sentence, and it's just stating that they also have to report those threats as well. The other threats.
It could be.
That could be
Yeah.
listed in 8462. That's another way that you can look at, interpret that sentence.
Yeah, I guess if that's the case, it just still seems like the second one needs to be changed.
I'm assuming that there's more threats reported in there, and I could look it up too, because I have it.
8462 is child abuse and neglect.
Yeah, so I think that that's what that sentence means. They, in addition to these threats, they still have to report the threats that are described in 8462. Because that would be different than,
Right, but basically the second sentence is saying, if the staff member believes something and the threat is a threat of violence, then what? Like, it's just not finished. That's why I think goes into that, what the third sentence is.
Yeah, what I can do, since this policy wasn't brought forward in any approval capacity or with an immediate need to change, Mr. Borowski, I can go in and take a look at what the statutes say. Because again, as I've experienced with what our state representatives and lawmakers pass, sometimes it is written as you see it, and it is put
Right.
in policy because that is what is in statute. And if you veer from that, then you're not in compliance with the statute. So I can go through the statutes 175-32, 118-13, 118, 164, 120, 13, and then for the September meeting, be prepared to go into a little bit more as to why the policy is written as such. I think, we saw that happen in policy a couple months ago began to look up what it said in statute, and we found that the statutory language was directly listed in the policy, which keeps us in compliance, wasn't written with the proper tense and, the proper order of sentences as we would write it in a.
Yeah, no, and I'm not trying to be nitpicky, it's just that as I'm reading it to try to understand it, I'm like, wait, this doesn't.
No, and I can appreciate where you're coming from. I mean, we deal with this on a regular basis. It's,
Sure.
you get it from the federal government, you get it from the state government, and
Now from the board.
and try to sort it out locally, it sometimes is a little bit confusing.
All right. All right.
Okay, any other questions on that?
One quick one. This was last updated, excuse me, in 2019, is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. So, not too long ago, but, I did have one follow-up question. I don't want to get too far off of this policy discussion and where we're at. In the beginning there of the last question, you had mentioned that 3 staff from each school district will talk about certain issues at a future date, correct? Is that what I heard?
Our discipline committee will meet monthly, with the exception of December. We'll give them the pass during that month because people are generally preparing for what could be the holidays. We're going to meet monthly. There's going to be 3 representatives from each school: principal, student services staff member, so psychologist, social worker, counselor, and a teacher representative. That, just for perspective, that'll put about 70 people in a room, just so that it's like, because that begins to be a lot of people when you're facilitating work group type discussions. They will come together, but each month there will be work that carries back into the school planning team. So at TNL, you've heard Ms. Landish talk about the SAIL teams at schools. Those are the leadership teams in the buildings. So the work from the discipline committee is going to go back to the schools. They'll be analyzing their data. They'll be planning around what their needs are. We're going to be coming back together and talking about, resources that the schools could use, a uniform structure to address it that would allow the schools the flexibility to meet their own needs. And we'll be reporting back to the Student Services Committee each month as to where we're at, with the exception of a January report, because we just won't have a meeting in December. But you will be in the loop all year long as to where we go with this committee work.
And just to follow up to that, do you, have you in the past ever surveyed the teachers and staff in each school to say, these are issues that we've seen? Is that part of some of these committees at times? I know we recently did a big survey that we went over a few months ago. But to get at maybe the heart of an issue or issues, have we ever done that and made that, I don't want to confuse the word mandatory here, but for our staff and teachers to report things so that that information can be.
We have surveyed our staff around school climate and student discipline in the past. We have seen common, responses back over time. We have had some very meaningful discussions around that. And it's interesting when you get people, educators in the room talking about, what it is and why it is happening. We did have a student discipline committee. We began it 4 years ago. We ran that committee for about a year and 3/4, and then COVID hit. And that committee, at the end of the day with that committee, they determined that the bulk of our discipline referrals were coming from black male students. That was what we found. And that the reason for that was that we were not meeting their needs in the classroom environment. And that was through, again, a year and a half of work as to what we did. The recommendation at the time that the committee made was to look at culturally relevant teaching practices, so that we could begin to look at the materials that we use, the instructional approaches that we were using, provide professional development with staff. And then that led into, part of that was the district equity committee. And some of that was the work that we did around, developing our staff. So, with this committee, we're looking at what structure do we need to take a look at our data, what behaviors are we seeing. We don't have a good outcome at this point, a clear outcome at this point, because we have to go through the process to see where the committee is going to end up with what their recommendations are. And there's a number of recommendations that can be made. For example, the committee could come up with the idea that we're going to go forward with like PBIS positive behavior interventions and supports as the framework. The committee could use our current structures around SAIL and the RTI processes that we have in the district to take a look at data and plan. But what we're really, in the end, I mean, to address any behavior situation, you're looking at what your data suggests, you're making targeted plans to address the problem, you're progress monitoring the interventions and the approaches that you're using, you're seeing if it has any effect over a given period of time. For school-wide discipline, the SAIL 100-day cycle is generally pretty good to begin to see behavior trends, and then make adjustments to that plan and go forward. So we already have a vehicle that could help us with that. It's just a matter of coming up with some, behavior-specific, student discipline-specific approaches that will help us with turning the tide on this issue for us. And the other thing to know is a lot of our school districts, the people that I meet with, are having the same discussions. How do we go about addressing, the students who have now come back to us after the pandemic? Because everybody saw increases in behavior and student need post-pandemic. And that does couple with our conversations around mental health, the supports that we're providing for mental health, the special education supports, interventionists in the district, the student services staff, so it all begins to come together.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So, Mrs. Zenobia, just on that survey, I've seen those surveys, we have done them, and some of the comments in there are very detailed about what's happening in, a teacher's classroom or school, so we have seen that. Those are responded to pretty well, those surveys. All righty. Next up is policy 5511, dress and grooming. So what is the discussion on that one? Mr. Zenobia?
I'll start.
Okay.
This, as I had said a little bit earlier, we've talked about this one a lot, and just in looking at when it was last updated, I think was 2007. But, yeah. So I know, sometimes it's, when you have students do the little things, that can help improve. I mean, in this particular policy area, I'm not sure how much of this is a problem, say, in the winter versus, coming into school and going out of school. But does this need to be, in your opinion, Dr. Cook, again, strengthened in a way that falls short of uniforms, or do it? It's a joke. Do some of the behavior things that we see stem from basic areas like this?
We, at a point in time prior to my arrival, we had Waukesha as a community in the district was addressing gang issues. And it was at that time, if you're looking at it from a dress code standpoint, it was at that time that kids were coming to school representing their colors, their gang, whatever it might be. We have not had that issue in recent years, in my time here, from a gang activity. Staying in contact with the police, looking at what we're seeing at schools, the gang activity piece isn't an issue. From a distraction standpoint, you had mentioned uniforms. I mean, if you were uniform-based and everybody had essentially like 4 options to choose from, would you be running into, you probably wouldn't see any issues related to dress other than compliance with the uniform requirement. Stepping it back to like what kids are able to wear now, it does get down to like what. The issue that we faced, we had some questions come in a few years ago, is the dress code policy being uniformly applied to male and female students, and what do your numbers look like? And the numbers, that we started to see, and we had to dig into it pretty deep, were, there were more dress code violations for female students than there were male students. And start to look at what clothing is available for female students versus what clothing is available for male students. Why were boys being referred for that versus why were girls being referred? So given the fact that we don't have uniforms in the school district, and that the clothing is the clothing that's available right now, I don't see clothing as a substantial distraction. Now, there might be schools, there might be teachers that say that, but we did this review last year. Formerly Mrs. Reinacek, Ms. Reinacek, Ms. Robertson now, did request that we review this. I met with every secondary administrator. We brought them in as teams, and we talked about the policy. We talked about the understanding of the policy, the enforcement of the policy, making sure that it was, applied uniformly. We see from, period by period, kids come to school. I mean, being a former building administrator, I knew that kids would show up in the morning dressed in what parents would say was appropriate. They had another set of clothes in their locker. First period, it didn't look that bad. Suddenly, fourth or fifth period, you're getting the kids sent down to the office. It's like, well, they would change their clothes, modify their clothes, whatever it was over the school day. So, again, I don't think from a policy standpoint it could be strengthened. It's just that consistency, every teacher, every hour, this is what the standard is. But having been an assistant principal at a high school, I mean, there was a policy that I was at my prior high school, and it was specifically targeted towards cleavage. That was actually written into the dress code. But based off of the class period, you may or may not have had a policy violation. English class where kids are sitting in the desk, nobody's getting sent down for that because you're just sitting in a desk. But if you were to move into a science lab, suddenly body position's changing, you got a policy violation. So it can get very involved. Again, has to be applied uniformly. Don't want to target one group over the other. And have to have, again, this is one of those things that from a classroom level has to be enforced every period by everybody, otherwise you get that inconsistency. Now, where we do have policy language is around hats, hoods, things like that. Those things have been known to get involved, affect the learning environment a little bit. From a safety standpoint, with the hoods up all the time, you can't see kids' faces. If we were ever to run into a medical emergency or have a situation that involved maybe a drug overdose, you would want to know any kid that was around because you don't know who else could be affected. And if everybody's got their hoods up and their face, you can't see them on the camera. Hats can be distracting. They could sit higher on the head, whatever it is, or turn into just a general distraction between kids, which is why those are written out of the policy. But just an aside to that, we are running into situations where medical providers are saying, this is a student with anxiety, they need to be required to wear a hat at school. As a student with anxiety, they should be able to have their hood up. And then when you have that, you're starting to then see inconsistencies, and that might be what's reported in some instances. They do it, why can't I do it? This kid gets to do it all the time, but not everybody else does. And, we have to make accommodations for the health need, and then maintain a, kind of a universal approach across our schools.
Mr. Montiel?
Yeah, there's so many difficulties in trying to apply this equally among genders and different groups. So I know that the principals and administrators struggle with that, and the teachers do too, and they're doing the best they can. One example I've been told of by a very smart 13-year-old that I know very well is midriffs. It was brought to attention on a female that had a midriff was showing, should not have been. But then that insightful young lady pointed to a bunch of football players in their jerseys. So I had to explain that there's difficulty in applying this, but you mentioned that issue was addressed, I think, a number of years ago about between the genders.
Yeah, so going into that review last year, when we met particularly with our high school administrators around that, we started to look at the numbers of kids, so we don't allow the cutoff sleeve t-shirts in school. That's an area where males would be violating the policy. The midriff is also not acceptable for males. So even be it a football jersey, you can still put a t-shirt on underneath the football jersey and cover up the midriff, because that is something that we can universally say is should be covered, because along with the midriff line can come the top of the underwear line, and you get into that whole business where the pants start going down too far, and joking, but I mean, if, wear a belt every day, keep your pants up, the whole business. But that, where we have to be common, we need to be common, and that was the expectation for the principals.
Yeah.
the consistency of the application of that policy, again, student can show up in the morning, midriff shirt on underneath the sweatshirt, look fine in the morning, and then all of a sudden the sweatshirt comes off, and the midriff shirt is there. You could go to school anticipating air conditioning is working that day and not necessarily be prepared underneath the long sleeve shirt you have, but the air conditioning isn't working well that day, and it gets too warm in the classroom, so you go down to that shirt, and sometimes you get sent down to the office. There are clothes that are just wholly inappropriate, though. The way jeans are being sold these days, you should get 40% off the clothing because 40% of the material is missing.
Yeah.
Those would be clothes that you wouldn't want to have on when you're coming to school. There should be an appropriate level of coverage, and we expect that our schools follow up on that when they see it. But, in defense of the kids that are wearing it, you go school by school, or store by store, and unless you're shopping at Cabela's and Fleet Farm for your clothes, you're seeing the current styles, and the current styles are, I grew up in the 90s, that was flannel shirts, sweatshirts, big pants and the whole business. That you were fully covered back in the 90s, but now it just seems like there's a material shortage and all the shirts have 25% less material.
Been there, yep. Thank you.
To help with the consistency issue, I'm just curious, has the school district or other policies ever considered pictures of acceptable and/or unacceptable? And the reason I ask that is, the company I work for, we've got a dress code, and there's, pictures of men and women, and what's an example of it? Not that you're going to have everyone in there, but I'm just curious if that's.
They do review these policies at the beginning of the year. I don't know if they're showing, pictures or not, or pictures of violations or not. You certainly can look into that, but we have a dress code that gives latitude to the schools to enforce, what is acceptable on which particular day. To Mr. Montiel's point, Mr. Zenobia's point, absent a uniform policy, where you expected, blue, black, khaki-colored pants, a polo shirt of your school's color. And there are schools that have done that. Milwaukee Public Schools has implemented that at places. Absent that, we serve a wide group of kids. And some of those kids are doing the best, and they're on their fourth layer of hand-me-down. You don't want to get into a place either where your code is shaming kids who are doing all they can with what they have. It is a very difficult thing to try to implement. What we're looking for is coverage and things that are appropriate for school that don't violate an individual's right of expression. And that is, essentially spelled out in A to D in this policy.
So we have talked about this policy a lot in my tenure here. And in fact, one of the things that we added was the building administration, in conjunction with the health and physical education department, will provide directives to students on an annual basis on appropriate swimwear in physical education classes. That was a big deal a long time ago in the board because we had some complaints about some of the attire that were being worn, not by the males. So this policy has been updated as things come up, for sure, because we've updated them and we've done the survey a couple times. Some of the student service directors before Dr. Cook was here also, had those surveys done too, and that's one of the things that came out of them. So we have had a school with uniforms, though. It was a policy of this board where you would poll the parents, and if there was a majority of parents that wanted uniforms, that school would have uniforms, and that was White Rock. They had uniforms for a long time. So that is not unknown in this district. We've had them. We had uniforms in White Rock until we closed that school down, so that's something that we've done here.
We still have that policy language.
Right, yes, exactly. We haven't gotten rid of it.
It wasn't approved as part of the revisions in 17.
Right.
But the old policy language is still in a folder upstairs, if that were ever anything the board wanted to discuss it.
So that's something that we have done in the past. If it was school by school, it wasn't a district-wide.
The other thought that just occurred to me, based on Mr. Montiel's comment about midriffs for male versus female, I don't know if the district has ever considered like generally speaking, would the dress code for women or girls be like, I don't know how you'd say it, a bit more modest than it is for boys?
We would have to
You know.
we have to stay consistent across everybody with all of the policies. I mean, we can't differentiate male, female, within a policy because, of the potential, discrimination or targeting that we would face. We have to maintain a level. If you think about it, I used to work construction. It paid for college for me. I did it, in the summers when I was teaching. And not trying to be crude, but, if you were working construction all day, the back end of your pants would eventually start to sweat down. And we see that amongst some kids based off of what they can afford, and so we have to have the flexibility within the policy to address what each kid is coming to school with. The policy does explicitly state that the superintendent will develop administrative guidelines and designate the principal as the arbiter of student dress and grooming in his or her building. And so, for instance, if there's a problem with this at such and such a school, and somebody comes to me with that, I go to the principal with that and make sure that that policy is reviewed with the students, reviewed with the parents, and that people are paying more close attention to it. To try to get too overarching and too universal, like this is the mandate top down, unless again you go to Mr. Zenobia's comment about uniforms, it gets very, very difficult to universally implement a dress code policy across all kids. They come in all shapes and sizes. They come from all different backgrounds. Some kids are still squeezing into things that they've been wearing for 2 or 3 years in school in spite of the growth spurt that they have. It's always interesting to see a boy who's in 8th grade into their freshman year. The pants looked really nice in 8th grade, but it looks like they're waiting for a flood at the end of freshman year because the growth spurt happened. That's the stuff that we're facing every day in schools, and I believe we have to give the schools the flexibility to address this as needed. We're not running into situations with gangs. We need to make sure that we're uniformly and as consistently and fairly applying this to male and female students, because that seems to be, one of the areas where it could be misaligned, and giving the kids the freedom to express themselves through dress in a manner that isn't disruptive to the school environment.
Any other discussion on that policy? Alrighty, next up on the discussion information items is update on school safety review.
Yes, it was my goal, and unfortunately I didn't meet it, to have had law enforcement and fire in by this meeting to present to you any possible changes. That meeting is scheduled for Thursday. We were working around people's vacation schedules. We wanted representation from the Sheriff's Department, the Police Department, the Fire Department, and appropriate district staff. So to let you know that we'll be reviewing that plan on Thursday. I don't anticipate any major changes to the plan. We have taken our work through with the Police Department and reviewed things. We've provided you some updates as to things that we have adjusted, as a result of the incident that we had at South. We talked about that extensively. I did have the opportunity to go and meet with a kind of a third-party vendor and take our work through them, sat down and talked about our processes and procedures. They were very impressed with all the things that they had that we are currently doing in our schools. We're continuing the safety discussion administratively to possibly come forward to the board with some recommendations on, physical upgrades to our schools, perhaps with cameras and things of that nature. So all of that work is to come, but really want to have a comprehensive team taking a look at what we're doing this week. If there are major changes, I will certainly let you know in an update, but we'll have more of a discussion with it in September after this group gets together. As an aside to that, I am bringing principals in, and we're talking about 3 things. We're doing a board policy review so that they understand the policies around discipline. But we're looking at the student behavior committee, and we're talking about some preliminary work that they can do this summer. And we're also talking about school safety, making sure that our perimeters of our schools are secure, that our visitor processes are in place, and that we're, conducting our drills and working with our staff so that they're prepared in the event that we have an emergency at one of our schools. So we've started to do that work administratively. They're going to take that to their teachers when the teachers come back to school in a couple of weeks.
Excellent.
If we do have changes, just so you know, and to forecast a little bit, we will be scheduling a closed session of this committee to discuss those changes, obviously for security reasons.
Excellent, thank you very much. Next up is recommendation for future meetings. If anyone has any,
No.
email myself and Dr. Cook, and we will get it on the agenda. So that concludes our meeting. Thank you all for attending. And our next meeting is scheduled for September what? Is it 20th? Okay, September 20th, 6 PM in the boardroom. Thank you very much.
Thank you.